It's Thursday, April 2nd, 2026, and today is National Peanut Butter and Jelly Day, which feels like one of those things that shouldn't work as well as it does. Two completely different textures, two completely different flavors, and somehow it becomes one of the most reliable meals of all time. Welcome to This Day in History from, wait, that's random. I'm your host, C.L. Burns. On April 2nd, 1513, Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de León sighted and landed on what is now the east coast of Florida. At the time, European exploration of the Americas was still relatively new, and expeditions like this were driven by a mix of motives: searching for land, wealth, trade routes, and sometimes stories that blurred the line between fact and legend. Ponce de León had previously been involved in the colonization of Puerto Rico, and this expedition was officially a search for new territory under the Spanish crown. When he arrived, he named the land La Florida, which I'm sure I'm not getting the pronunciation correct there, but that's okay, which roughly translates to land of flowers, partially because of the lush vegetation and partly because it coincided with the Spanish Easter season, known as Pascua, Florida. There again, I'm sure I got that horribly mispronounced. Sorry. Now, the story that most people associate with Ponce de León is the Fountain of Youth. There is no historical evidence that he was actually searching for a magical spring that could restore youth. That idea seems to have been added later. But the fact that the story stuck says something about how people understand exploration. From the perspective of the crew, this wasn't a legend. They were sailing to completely unknown territory. No maps that matched reality. No clear idea of what was ahead. Just coastline, weather, and whatever they encountered when they stepped off the ship. And that's the part that's easy to forget. For them, this wasn't history yet. It was just forward. Exploration like that is about expanding physical boundaries. But a few centuries later, the next challenge wasn't about discovering new land. It was about creating systems people could rely on. On this date in 1792, the United States passed the Coinage Act, officially establishing the U.S. Mint and creating a standardized national currency. Before this, money in the United States was inconsistent at best. People used a mix of foreign coins, barter systems, and locally issued currency. Spanish dollars were common, along with British coins and various forms of paper notes, which meant that value wasn't always clear. One coin might be accepted in one place but not another. Prices weren't always standardized. Trade depended heavily on trust and local agreement. The Coinage Act changed that. It defined the U.S. dollar as a standard unit and established specific coins with fixed values, like cents, dimes, and dollars, based on precise amounts of metals. The mechanism behind it was simple, but powerful. Each coin contained a specific weight of precious metal, typically gold or silver, which gave it inherent value. That meant a coin wasn't just a symbol of money, it was money, based on its material. Standardization did something important. It made transactions predictable. If everyone agrees on what a dollar is, trade becomes easier, faster, and more scalable. And that's the kind of thing that quietly shapes daily life. You don't think about it when you're using it. But without it, everything becomes just a little more complicated. And once systems like that are in place, systems that organize how people live and interact, something else starts to happen. People begin to reflect on those systems, sometimes through stories. On this date in 1972, Charlie Chaplin returned to the United States for the first time in nearly 20 years. Chaplin had been one of the most famous figures in early film history, known for his character the Tramp, a silent, expressive figure navigating a world that was often indifferent, unfair, or absurd. But in the 1950s, Chaplin left the United States amid political controversy and accusations related to his personal beliefs. For decades, he remained abroad, effectively separated from the country where he had built his career. In 1972, he returned to receive an honorary Academy Award. And the moment was different than you might expect. When Chaplin appeared on stage, the audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted over 10 minutes. Not for a specific film, not for a single performance, but for everything he had contributed over time. Chaplin's films worked in a very specific way. Because they were largely silent, they relied on physical movement, timing, and visual storytelling instead of dialogue. The mechanism was simple: emotion conveyed through action. A look, a stumble, a pause. And somehow that translated across languages, cultures, and generations, which is why decades later people still recognize what he had built. And when you think about it, that idea, telling stories in a way that reaches people across time and place, shows up in another form entirely. Which brings us to someone born on this day. Hans Christian Andersen was born on April 2nd, 1805 in Denmark. He became one of the most well-known storytellers in history, writing fairy tales like The Little Mermaid, The Ugly Duckling, and The Emperor's New Clothes. On the surface, these stories often felt simple, short, direct, easy to follow. But underneath that simplicity, they tend to explore much larger ideas: identity, transformation, honesty, belonging. The Emperor's New Clothes, for example, is often remembered as a children's story. But it's really about how people can convince themselves to believe something simply because everyone else appears to believe it too. That kind of storytelling doesn't rely on complexity. It relies on clarity. And that's what lasts. If you step back and look at these moments together, a pattern begins to appear. An explorer moves into unknown territory. A country creates a system to bring order to everyday life. And storytellers find ways to explain the world in ways people can understand. Different paths, different purposes, but all of them are ways of making sense of something unfamiliar. Anyway, those are a few of the things that I ended up discovering while wandering through April 2nd. Stop by tomorrow and we'll see where the next date takes us. If you want to know more about me or the work I do, you can find everything at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and I appreciate you stopping by.